Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Dirty Gaming and a new video on the channel going over my league starter for 326. The build that I've settled on is a Frostblade Slayer. Before we jump into the guide, let's go over the changes that affect the build in the upcoming league and what tier I would rate this starter. I'll also go over why you might pick this build as a starter. I want people who are interested to stay and people who aren't to drop off. I don't want to waste people's time. So Frostblades received quite a potentially significant nerf to clear, with the projectiles dealing 30% less damage, but I don't think it's going to be a deal breaker and clear should still be really quick. The projectile part of the skill did nothing for single target. It may be that clear is slightly worse, but I still think it's going to be really good. There was also a nerf to an elemental mastery, which lowers the single target damage, but again, nothing deal breaking. There's potential further nerfs to boss damage because GGG in the patch notes have said they're still tweaking cold nodes, and we might not know about those until league start. I see this definitely being a nerf, and I predict it'll be the mastery that gives you more damage per freeze duration on enemies, which hurts bossing damage a lot. However, this build for my purposes is designed to get to maps really quick, get my 2 voidstones on a shoestring budget, and then not have to invest too much more to get my 4 voidstones and start dealing with some of the new endgame content in T14 plus maps. Now, strike skills in general have took a bit of a hit. Lightning Strike got absolutely decimated in loads of different ways. Frostblades of Katabasis, which was going to be my league starter, got its damage absolutely gutted. I don't think strike skills are in an amazing place, but I love Frostblades as a skill, and I still think it's good enough as a league starter. If I was to rate it, it'd be nothing higher than a B tier, and there's plenty of better builds if all you care about is efficiency. However, for fun and speed, personally I'd rate it as S tier, which is why I'm league starting this skill. So with that out of the way, let's move on to the build guide. So let's start with the skill and the playstyle. Frostblades is a melee attack and it shoots out projectiles when you hit an enemy. These projectiles go across the screen and can further hit and kill enemies. It converts some physical damage to cold, and when combined with Tribal Fury Notable and Herald of Ice, the clear becomes amazing. You can quickly traverse through the maps with Whirling Blades. It makes it a very fast mapper. Now, as mentioned, the projectiles have taken a hit in terms of damage, but I can't really see it being too much of an issue. I think the clear is still going to be fine. It's also one of the safer melee skills to use, as it's pretty easy to freeze almost any enemy in the game, and you're going to be blowing up half the screen when you hit an enemy. It keeps you out of harm's way for both mapping and bossing. Now, it doesn't have a double strike mechanic like Lightning Strike or Smite, so it does need help early on in the form of some cheap, easily accessible uniques to make your league start nice and comfy. Cold damage is also pretty easy to scale on a melee character, and we can add some even more powerful uniques later on in the game. Before we move on to the gems, gear and leveling, let's firstly talk about the new mechanics and items that have been added in 326 that should easily make up for the nerfs to the skill and the passive tree. Firstly, King's March runes are coming back, but in a different way. Instead of being used to craft weapons, they're used to replace a mastery on the passive tree. We have a few spare masteries on the tree that you can take, and there could be some very nice runes to slot in here. At this stage, we don't know the rarity or details of these items, but I imagine there'll be a few that will be well worth using for the cost of 1 passive point. Secondly, the league mechanic introduces mercenaries into the game. These are NPCs who come with specific sets of skills and gear. You're able to equip these mercenaries with any gear that you find or purchase. This is essentially going to enable you to build a mini aura bot and provide them with good means to survive and good ways to create and share buffs and debuffs, and it's going to be a ridiculously big power spike. It's going to easily make up for and exceed the level of power that the build had last league, and this is the main reason for me having faith in this build. I know this build can get to T60 max extremely quickly, and it'll enable me to seek out those high level rogues as soon as possible. As soon as I know more about this, I'll put it in the POE or in the video description, but we're realistically not going to know any more until the league launches, and this video will already be out by then. So let's tackle leveling the build. There's a comprehensive POE and video description that gives you act by act skills, trees and gear. You can also use a loadout drop down menu on the top right just to get everything to change to the act that you want. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this part of the video. I like to level with Frostblades from the very beginning. It is quite weak for single target, so the first few acts can be a bit of a chore, but I just like to use the skill that my build is going to have at endgame as soon as I can. You're going to level with any two-handed weapon that you find for the first few acts. In Act 1, look for 2 iron rings and a rustic sash. It helps massively with damage. When you get to Brutus, make sure you're not still on your starting weapon. The DPS will be rough. The items you want to look out for are a jade chopper, a longsword, or a bastard sword. A good filter is linked in the video description which will highlight these weapons. When you kill Dweller of the Deep, you get a guaranteed essence. Save this for one of these weapons. If you have also found a blacksmith's whetstone, use that as well on the weapon and it will give you a lot more damage. From Act 3 onwards, you only want to be using two-handed axes to synergize with the passive tree. While leveling, we're going to utilize strong keystones and nodes such as Precise Technique, Onslaught on Kill, Rage on Hit, and a few masteries that give really good increased damage. Once you finish your first labyrinth, the build should feel a lot better and it will be fast and smooth sailing from here. Utilize the black market when looking for your first 4-link and when you need a weapon upgrade. This can really get you out of a hole. In regard to the league mechanic, I would not recruit any mercenaries as they don't level up with you, so you're just going to spend so much time replacing them because they keep dying. However, if you see a nice item in their inventory or useful currency, then slay them for the rewards. I would be careful though, as league mechanics are notoriously overtuned at league start. If this is the case, just ignore them until later or until they patch it. I don't plan on recruiting mercenaries at all until I get to T14 plus maps, because then I know they're not going to get out leveled and I won't have to replace them. When you finish maps, make sure you are resistance capped, and if needed, hit up the black market for new gear and a new axe. On this setup, you'll comfortably be able to breeze through white maps and early tier yellow maps without making any more upgrades. When you hit level 80 and you have 10 to 20 chaos orbs to spend, you're going to upgrade to the first stage of the endgame build, which we're going to go through now. So let's go through the gear you want to buy or craft to see you through your Atlas completion. You want a unique dagger called the White Wind. This will be 5 to 10 chaos on day 1, 2 chaos on day 2. It's a really good dagger for early game. It's got really good damage and suppression if you keep your offhand empty. So you may need to go into the options menu and untick auto equip items, because if you pick up a veiled shield or weapon, it will automatically put it in your offhand. For boots, we want Dark Ray Vectors. They give us +1 to frenzy charges, a boost to evasion and movement speed when we're at max frenzy charges. These work really well, especially once we get our 4th Ascendancy and we're going to be stacking frenzy charges. They're a massive bonus. For gloves, we're going to rock Southbound gloves. These give a lot of early game cold damage. Now these gloves put a few people off because of the line that you can only kill frozen enemies, but it also increases the freeze duration on enemies. I've done 5 full practice runs on this build all the way to 4 voidstones, and I've never failed to kill an enemy, including the pinnacle bosses. For a belt, for those of you that follow my builds, it won't be a surprise to learn that I'm running the Perseverance belt. I use it on pretty much every melee character. Now normally it's a belt used for characters stacking armor and evasion, because the more of those you stack, the more damage you get. This build doesn't do any of that. We're using the belt purely for the onslaught buff when fortified. It's a massive quality of life when mapping, and it's really good on bosses when you don't have a lot of damage. To have perma onslaught on bosses not only helps with your damage, but it helps you move out of the way of attacks. For an amulet, I would recommend a Carnage Heart amulet. It's really good early on for Slayer. It gives damage when leeching, lots of attributes which we desperately need, and it gives us some resistances. If you want to anoint this amulet, go for Divine Judgment. It gives a lot of increased elemental damage. Now the rest of the items are going to be rares. You want a 5-link body armor. 4 links probably aren't going to cut it for Atlas completion, and you can either gamble at the black market for a 5-link or buy one for a couple of chaos. You want it to be a fairly high armor and evasion base, and you want some resistances on it. Ideally you don't want any life, because then you can utilize the life mastery that gives you 15% increased life. For a helmet, again it's just a rare evasion or armor and evasion helmet. Again, you just want life and resistances. If you can get an intelligence roll on the helmet as well, it will help, but we can get that on a ring also. And then lastly, you're going to want 2 rare rings. All you need on these are intelligence on one and accuracy on another. You're going to need both these to ensure, firstly, that we have a 100% chance to hit. Secondly, that we've got enough intelligence to equip White Wind, because it needs 131 intelligence. Outside of those 2 stats, it's as much life and resistances as you can get on those rings. And that's it. That's your gear setup. You realistically don't need to look at your gear again until you've cleared your Atlas. In terms of flasks at this stage, you're going to want a diamond flask. If you can, use alterations to roll this for increased crit chance. It's a big damage increase. I recommend a jade flask just to get some evasion. and then again roll that for extra evasion. You're going to want a Divine Life Flask with instant usage and Corrupted Blood immunity, and then a Quicksilver Flask for movement speed. On this I will go for either less effective shock or less effective curses. And lastly, for an absolutely insane damage increase, and I can't believe these haven't been nerfed, you want a Prismatic Tincture with penetrates elemental resistances. If you can get a high roll on the penetration, this can give you 40% more damage on bosses. It's absolutely insane, and to get that sort of increase on gear costs you multiple divines. So if there's one thing that you do when you get your flask, if you can only afford to do one thing, get the Prismatic Tincture with penetrates elemental resistances. Refer to the POB for links at this stage and the passive tree, as this is the biggest respec that we'll do on the build. You're going to be respecing 15 to 20 points. This setup, as I mentioned, is going to see you through your Atlas completion, but farming T16 maps may feel a little bit uncomfortable. The next setup you want to go for, you want to add a Heat Shiver helmet, a 6-link chest, and a Taming ring. With all this setup, you've got everything you need to go and get your 3rd and 4th voidstones and start farming a ton of currency. There's going to be an endgame loadout in the POB. This will take you to about 10 million DPS. This is not the furthest the character can go, but there's so much undiscovered stuff in this new league. I don't want to put together a really expensive min-max POB for then it to be not really that relevant a week into the league. The setup I've given you will get you farming nearly any content that you want to farm, bar boss farming, which this build is not for anyway, and min-maxing like T17s and the new versions of maps. But once I understand what new stuff is available in the game, I will bring out another video with a min-max version that can hopefully take on all the content in the game. So let's move on to the gem links in the build. You're going to have Frostblades as your main skill. You're going to be supporting that with Multi-Strike, which gives us more damage and more attack speed. You're going to have elemental damage with attacks, which again is just more elemental damage. Crit damage support, this is quite important because we run a lot of uniques on this build, so it's hard to get a lot of crit damage, so this gem gives a lot of damage. Then going to have Ice Bite support. This gives a ton of cold damage based on your frenzy charges, and we're stacking a lot of them. And then finally we're running Inspiration. This lowers mana cost, gives us crit chance, and gives us elemental damage. It's important to note that at endgame you're going to have an Eater mod on your chest that is chance to get Fortify on hit, so you don't need to run it in your gem links. If you don't have that implicit on your chest, drop elemental damage with attacks for Fortify. In your dagger is where we're going to put our first aura setup, which is Skitterbots linked to Bone Chill. Skitterbots just automatically puts a decent shot on the enemy. By linking Bone Chill to it, it means that enemies take more cold damage from us when they're affected by Skitterbots. You also want to slot a Flame Dash in here. We do have Whirling Blades, which we'll come on to later, but you might need Flame Dash for bosses, to get over gaps, and to get out of Grasping Vines. It doesn't need to be linked to the other two, but it doesn't matter if it is. In your helmet, you want to have faster attacks linked to Whirling Blades, then you want an Enduring Cry and a Herald of Ice. In my character, I've got them all linked together. They don't need to be, however, Enduring Cry and Herald of Ice can't be used by faster attacks anyway, so it doesn't matter if all four are linked together, as long as faster attacks is linked to Whirling Blades. If we move on to the gloves, this is where we've got a guard setup and our Precision Aura. Precision is to make sure we cap accuracy, and it gives us critical strike chance. You won't be able to level this all the way up, so just level it far enough that your mana is comfy. Just before we go on to the last gem links, I just want to explain what Enduring Cry is, because people might not be aware, and how to actually make sure your automation works, because this confuses some people. Enduring Cry gives us endurance charges when we use a war cry next to an enemy. You're only going to need to use this on bosses where there's no adds, because you're going to get endurance charge on kill when you're mapping. When you go into a boss fight, you just press Enduring Cry and you'll get endurance charges. It's got a cooldown of about 8 seconds, but your charges last about 20 seconds. So just use it whenever you want endurance charges. In terms of automation, it doesn't work automatically, and it also doesn't work in hideout. So if we just quickly have a look at the automation gem, if we have a look here, it says while this skill is active, supported spells will repeatedly trigger. You would assume that just linking the gem up is all you need to do, but it's not actually the case. If you go into your buff bar, you'll see automation here, and you actually have to put it on. If you don't have the skill active, you won't actually ever trigger the skill that it's linked to. One important thing to note is it doesn't work in your hideout, which is why it's not activated now. If I go into any zone, doesn't matter what one, and then we just walk, you'll start to see the steel skin buff there. Let's say link to more duration. Once they're all leveled up to 20, 40% of the time that you are in combat, this buff will be up. So it's definitely worth running and fitting in. It is RNG as to whether it's going to save you or not, because it might not be up, but it's certainly better than not running it. Linked up to automation, you never have to worry about casting it, it just casts automatically. And then finally in the boots, we've got our mark set up. So we've got an Assassin's Mark linked to life tap support and mark on hit support. And then in here, I've also got Blood Rage, which you use when mapping for frenzy charges and faster attack speed. Your life tap support, Assassin's Mark and mark on hit need to all be linked together. Blood Rage can be on its own, but again, it doesn't matter if all four are linked together because they won't have any effect on your Blood Rage. So let's go through jewels for the build. Everything will be in a POE anyway, but I just want to go through the stats that you want to look for. As you can see on the tree, we path by 1 point jewel socket here, a 2 point jewel socket here, which I will add in later on, but I'm only level 94, and then a 1 point jewel socket here. The stats ideally you want to look for are as much crit multi as possible. You might need to get accuracy, but everyone's build's going to be different, so check POB to see if your chance to hit is 100%. If it isn't, get some percentage global accuracy. But what you're really looking for if you don't need accuracy is as much crit multi as possible, and there's lots of different variations, and just getting a 2 mod crit jewel like this one here is not very expensive. Because there's so many combinations, they don't tend to be very expensive unless you're stacking like 3 or 4 mods. So if you could get a jewel with double crit multi and anything else on, that's kind of what you're looking for. If you do want to add a lethal pride jewel in later on, that's an option because it gives us a chance to deal double damage and intimidate if you get the right one. It's something I probably wouldn't worry about very early in the league because even mediocre lethal pride jewels are really expensive. If you're unfamiliar with Legion jewels, the way they work is there are thousands of different seeds and each number puts different stats on a node within a region in your passive tree. All you need to do if you want to find one that helps you is go into POB and use this find timeless jewel button. You need to make sure this filter node is ticked. We want a lethal pride. Conqueror can be any. What a conqueror does is it will apply a different keystone to the keystone that's already there, but we don't take any keystones on this build. So we'll just put any. Then it will ask you what jewel socket you want to put it in. We can put it in 2 slots. We can put it in Ghost Dance or we can put it in Wind Dancer. Wind Dancer jewels are always more expensive because they fit more builds. If we go in Ghost Dance, it's probably going to save us some currency. So you're going to click Jewel Socket Ghost Dance, tick filter nodes, and then the way it works is you essentially just add the mods in you want. So if you click search for node, it gives you all of the different nodes that are available. So if you wanted to stack melee crit multi, you can put that in. If you wanted melee crit chance, you can put that in. If you wanted rage on melee hit, there is also +1 to fortification, which will probably be really expensive this league. What I would recommend for a first lethal pride, and we're talking maybe week 1 because these will be expensive and overpriced, is double damage and intimidate. All you have to do when you add a mod is just change the 0 at the end to a 1. So we've gone for double damage, then we'll go for intimidate, put that back to a 1, make sure filter nodes is ticked, and then you just press search. This will basically give you all of the seed numbers that exist with the nodes you've got on the tree that fit. And then you can actually just directly search for these jewels on trade. You just click on one, hold shift, and then go as far as you want. Copy URL trade, you go into your web browser, you paste the link, and then it will bring up all the jewels available. Bear in mind, this is settlers. It ends in a couple of days, so everything's crazily overpriced. If it takes you to the wrong league, you can just literally type in the name of the league here and it will bring it up. But it should, when POB is updated, take you to the correct league, and then you can then just whisper the person and buy the jewel. I would not pay any more than 1 to 2 divines for one. Yes, they give us a lot of damage, but you could probably get a crit multi-jewel with 3 stats on it for that price, and it probably gives you more damage. Now, normally I see people go through the skill tree in build guide videos, but for this build, I'm not going to do that just because there's quite a few different trees depending on the weapon loadout that you're on. So when you're on your axes, you'll have one tree. When you go to White Wind, you'll have another tree. When you eventually go Claw and Shield, you'll have another tree. It's very difficult to know what to go through. So what I've got here is pulled up your White Wind tree. When you're sort of min-maxing this build, which won't cost that much currency, you're going to cap out at about 10 million DPS. That's going to be ample for like the first week of the league, and by then I'll have had a chance to look at all the new stuff that's coming in, and then we can get a Claw and Shield POB out so that you can then push the damage like to 20 to 30 million or whatever you want to scale it to. There isn't much to point out on the tree. It's all pretty straightforward, and POB has all of the masteries and all of the passive tree. Only thing I think is really important to point out is don't be tempted to take 3% increased damage per charge. Yes, it's quite a bit of damage. It's probably 8% more damage, but charge duration is really, really important. You have to take this node. It will feel much better. Always have +1 strike on your additional nearby enemy because we're running unique gloves, and that's the only other place it can roll is on rare gloves. Probably the most important one to point out is this node here. Now, we are still waiting for cold nodes to be reviewed in patch notes by GGG. This may not exist by the time the league starts. If it does, it's very important that you take it. I hope they're not going to do anything with it, and I hope they're actually going to add more interesting things for cold damage since they've revamped or juiced up Winter Orb. But this mastery adds so much damage on pinnacle bosses. Frostblades is a mapper, but you still have to get your 4 voidstones. This mastery helps a lot because you're in the fight for a few minutes, so you're going to actually probably stack up the maximum 50% increased damage. The reason I'm pointing this out is because when you run your axes, we're using the fizz to cold conversion, so don't forget to switch your mastery around when you go to White Wind. The rest of the tree is fairly straightforward for an attack build. We take all of the dagger nodes because we're running daggers. We have to take double accuracy nodes if we want to get 100% chance to hit. We've got our frenzy on marked targets, more damage against marked targets, and then all of the juicy endurance and frenzy charge nodes. One keystone to consider is point blank. It's not going to be in the POB because we don't know how much an effect the 30% less projectile damage is going to have. But if it turns out that you're not even clearing enemies within a few meters of you, stick point blank on. It's 30% more damage to targets that are close by. It will improve your clear. I don't think you're going to need to spec into point blank, but it's just there as an option if you struggle to clear at least the enemies around you. So instead of spending the time going through the skill tree, we'll just go through the Ascendancy and the order you need to take them, but it is all in the POB. First node you want to take is Bane of Legends. It's 10% more damage if you've killed recently, and 20% more damage with hits and ailments against uniques. This helps a lot because single target is definitely Frostblade's weakness. Picking this up first just makes the rest of the campaign much easier. You're then going to take Headsman, which gives us 20% coal and some bonuses when we kill enemies. This is really important to take as well because the third labyrinth, you might be slightly under geared, but when you can coal Izara at 20%, it means that last chamber lasts no time at all. This is also really good for your pinnacle bosses and picking up your voidstones. You can't coal Elder, I believe, in the Uber Elder fight, but pretty much every enemy other than Einar's beasts can be coaled. You're then going to go and take Brutal Fervor when you do Merc Lab before you finish the campaign. This gives us our Overleech and more maximum recovery. This is just such a nice quality of life node. And then once you're into maps and you've started taking your Frenzy and Endurance charge nodes, you're going to take Masterful Form, which makes the Endurance charges that we have equal to our maximum Frenzy charges. You still have to generate these charges, which is why we've got Endurance charge on kill, and it's why we've got Enduring Cry in our setup, because there will be no one to kill at boss fight, so you need to Enduring Cry to get your endurance charges. On just the basic Dark Ray Vector setup, you're going to have 8 Frenzy and 8 endurance charges. That's just massive damage and massive defenses. And that's why I don't run any defensive auras on the build. What you can do, if you feel you are a little bit squishy though, is look for a mercenary with the Grace aura. Having Grace as an aura and getting some extra evasion will make the build feel a lot better. But you will find that you're freezing most stuff anyway, so you very rarely get in danger. So very quickly, let's cover off the Pantheons. We don't really have a way to get ailment immune on this build until much later on, so your priority is to get 100% chance to avoid being frozen, and then reduce effective chill after that. They're the only two that I would say you have to have before you start pushing into endgame, because you'll get frozen by enemies, chilled by enemies. More importantly, there's a mod on magic enemies called Reflect Certain Ailments. Because we freeze, every time you hit those enemies, you're going to freeze yourself. Because we're also using Southbound, which gives you increased freeze duration, you freeze yourself for about 6 seconds. Now this can turn up in as early as tier 1 maps. So what I would do before you get this Pantheon is have a Purity of Elements in a spare socket. If you notice these enemies in maps, drop your damage aura, put on your Purity aura. Because what tends to happen in maps, if there is one pack of mobs with a certain modifier on it, it's likely that that's shared between many other mobs in the map as well, and you don't want to be either dying or taking forever to complete the map because every time you hit someone you're frozen for 4 seconds. In terms of your minor Pantheon, it's really up to you. It depends on the map that you're running. If you've got a map that's got shot ground or increased effective shock, you're going to run Gurakan. Same as if you've got enemies blind you on hit, you run Gurakan. If you've got a burning ground mod, you're going to run Abarath. If you don't have anything, I tend to run Soul of Ralakesh, mainly because we don't have a lot of fizz mitigation. So bleeding can actually hurt, especially if there's lots going on and you don't notice it. Now, Divine Vessels are a bit of potluck. You sometimes get 1 to 2 drop, you sometimes don't see any till level 90, 91, 92. As soon as you've got spare currency, I would buy one from the currency exchange just to get that chance to avoid being frozen. In terms of what map to do, it changes each league and I don't know what map you're going to need to complete. But what it will do is give you the name of the boss here. You can go onto your atlas and just put in the name of the boss and it will show you what map. So we'll just put in Tanner because that's the name of the boss and it just highlights it here. We know we need to run Coral Ruins. So yeah, put your Divine Vessel into the map, off you go, get your canopy frozen. You don't really have to worry about much else after that. And that covers off everything I wanted to go through today. I will bring out a further video because I have put a end game Claw and Shield in there. This is not your min-max version, but this is if you want to push higher than the Whitewind version, but more importantly, you want to stack a lot more life into the build. Now, I would think this is probably going to cost you 10 to 12 divines more than the Whitewind version, and you maybe get 20 to 25% more DPS, but you do get a lot more survivability. What I'll do is bring out a further video going through how to craft the majority of these items, because if you just search them on trade, you're going to be spending quite a lot of currency, but there are ways that you can craft these for much cheaper. Personally, it's not something I'm going to do because I want to wait and see all the new stuff that comes with the league, and then I'll redesign an endgame POB. We don't know what sort of gems mercenaries have. We don't know what sort of buffs they can give us. We don't know how rare these new jewelry items are going to be, or these new crafting items where they get potential. So there's loads of things to look at that can make how you craft an item completely different and also completely change the budget. So personally, I'm not going to go for this because I want to save my currency to see what comes out. So I'm just going to push to this week 1 version of the build because it keeps all the key uniques, and then we don't need to craft as many rare items. Again, in the crafting video that I bring out, I'll go through how to craft the items in this build as well, which will be a lot easier because you've only got 5 rare items, and that's including a jewel in your Stygian buys. I think that covers everything. There's a detailed POB in the video description. There's a link to the loot filters that I'm going to be using at League Start. In that same link, it will take you to my characters, so you can follow along with the character if you wanted to see how I'm progressing. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments. Hope this video helps people out. As I say, it's not an S tier League starter, but it's what I'm starting, and I like to bring videos out so that people can follow along. Take care. Hope you all have a great League start, and see you in the next one.